Hello, Secondary Math 2 kids. We are going to be talking more about quadratics, okay, super fun. But today we're going to be learning about solving for the discriminant, okay, and that's a word we're going to talk more about in a second. Okay, so we have learned to solve quadratic equations, right? A quadratic equation is where the highest degree is 2, right? You see a little k squared there. Okay, we've learned to solve them by factoring. So let's go ahead and practice that some more. So let's look at number 1. Okay, so if I'm going to solve by factoring, that means the first number I need to look at is this -6. Okay, so I need factors of -6, so two numbers that are going to multiply to give me -6, but add to give me a +1, right? It's that number in front of the middle variable. Okay, so let's just test some out. In order for it to be a -6, we need 1 to be positive, 1 to be negative. Okay, 1 times -6 will give me -6, but 1 minus 6 gives me -5. So that's not what we're looking for. Okay, well, what about maybe 2 times -3? Okay, that's going to give me a -1. Ooh, that's close. We're looking for a +1, so maybe let's try 3 times -2. There's my +1, because 3 minus 2 is 1. Okay, so we found our two factors, so we can rewrite it as k plus 3 for +3 times k minus 2 for -2, and we bring down r equals 0. Okay, we need to bring down r equals 0 because we need to take each one of these pieces and set it equal to 0 and solve. Okay, so I have k plus 3 equals 0. Okay, and if I'm trying to get this k by itself, what is the opposite of +3? How do I get that by itself? Subtract 3. Okay, so we know that our first answer is k equals -3. Remember, in quadratics, we're always going to get two answers. Okay, so let's find our second one. So I need to take my second piece, which is k minus 2. Set it equal to 0 and solve. So if I have this k minus 2 and I need k to be by itself, what is the opposite of -2? Going to add 2. Okay, so our second answer is 0 plus 2 is 2. Okay, remember in quadratics, once you get your factored numbers, you can pretty much say, okay, I know the opposite of a +3 is -3. I know the opposite of -2 is +2. And those were our two answers. Okay, let's look at number 2. Okay, so remember, there's this really important rule when we're solving by factoring or solving quadratics at all, that it has to equal 0 in order to solve by factoring. Okay, so let's put that note on our paper because it's super important. Must equal 0 to solve. Okay, so if I want one side to equal 0, that means I need to move this 5m and this -4 over to that same side as my m squared. Okay, so if I need to move them, what is the opposite of a +5m? It's going to be -5m. Okay, it's going to move it over there. And what's the opposite of -4? It's going to be +4, and that's going to also move it over there. Okay, so now we can rewrite it as m squared, that was already over there, minus 5m and plus 4. And now it equals 0, so we can go ahead and solve it by factoring. Okay, so when we're solving by factoring, we look at our third number. So I need factors or two numbers that multiply to give me a +4, but are going to add to give me -5. Okay, so I have 1 times 4, which will give me 4. When I add those, I get a +5. Ooh, that's close. We're looking for a -5. Okay, so then if I do a -1 times a -4, remember a negative times a negative still gives me a positive. But now I have -5. So there we go. Okay, so we found our two factors. So I can rewrite it as m minus 1 and m minus 4. Bring down my equals 0, and it is factored, so I can solve it. Okay, so I'm going to take each piece. My first piece is m minus 1, set it equal to 0. Okay, the opposite of minus 1 is plus 1. So I have m equals 1 for my first answer. Let's take our second piece. M minus 4 equals 0. The opposite of minus 4 is plus 4. So my second answer is positive 4. Okay, which we know if we were to say, okay, the opposite of negative 1 is positive 1. The opposite of negative 4 is positive 4. And there are our two answers. Okay, so we've practiced solving quadratics with factoring. Okay, and last time I introduced you to this thing called the quadratic formula that also allows us to solve quadratic equations. Okay, the great thing about the quadratic formula is that it will always work. Okay, sometimes factoring won't work, but the quadratic formula will always work. Okay, so if you remember that really annoying song that I made you guys listen to on the video, we know that our quadratic formula is x is equal to plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. Oh my gosh, I forgot something. X is equal to negative b. Oh my gosh, I totally forgot that. Darn it, now it looks bad. Okay, it's okay, I'll just rewrite it. X is equal to negative b. That was my first, I was like, why does that look so weird? Okay, sorry about that. All over 2 times a. Okay, so if you need to listen to that song to memorize it again, go for it. Okay, so we know that x is equal to negative b plus or minus, that's where our two answers come from, the square root of b squared minus 4ac, or 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a, or divided by 2 times a. Okay, so number 4. This is where we get this new word. It's asking us to identify the part of the quadratic formula known as the discriminant. Okay, so the discriminant is, let's draw an arrow. Should I draw an arrow right there? There we go. Is this part right there. The part under the square root. Okay, so it's this b squared minus 4 times a times c. Okay, so our discriminant is b squared minus 4 times a times c. It's just that part of the quadratic formula. That's all we're going to be practicing solving today, is just that little part. Okay, so now what we need to practice doing is actually filling in our quadratic formula. So remember, these are always written in standard form. Okay, and I'm going to make this note right here. Okay, standard form is written a times x squared plus b times x plus c. Okay, so that is standard form. Okay, so if we're looking at our quadratic equations, we know that a is the one in front of the variable squared, b is in front of the variable, just one of the variables, and c comes next. So a, b, c. Okay, so let's identify what is my a, what is my b, and what is my c. Okay, so looking over here, what number, what coefficient is my a? It's going to be 2. Okay, what coefficient is my b? It's going to be 5. And what coefficient is my c? -7. Okay, now that we know these things, we can just fill in everywhere we see an A or a B or a C, we can fill in with these numbers. Okay, so let's go ahead and copy down our quadratic formula, leaving little spaces where the A's, the B's, and the C's are. Okay, so I have x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Okay, and I'm just going to fill in these blank spaces with the numbers we identified. Okay, so the first space is b, negative b. So what number did we identify as b? Positive 5. X is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared, so another b, so that tells me another 5 right there, minus 4 times a times c, so first we have our a, which is 2, and our c, which is negative 7, all over 2 times a, and our a again is 2. Okay, so that's all I want you to do for 5 and 6. So let's do 6. So looking at our quadratic equation, we know that it's always written A, B, and C. Okay, so let's identify what's my A, what's my B, and what's my C. Okay, what is my A? What is the number in front of the x squared? Because it's not x squared. What's the number in front of it? It's going to be a 1. My B in front of the x, negative 5. And my C is negative 24. Okay, well now that we know our A's, our B's, and our C's, we can rewrite our quadratic formula. Okay, so I have x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. And now let's just fill in those spaces. Okay, so x is equal to negative b. What is my b? Negative 5. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. So what's my b again? Negative 5. Minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is negative 24. All over 2 times a, and my a is 1. Okay, so that's all I wanted you to do for 5 and 6, was simply identify the A's, the B's, and the C's, and then put them where they go in the quadratic formula. Okay, so let's do 7 through 10. So now it's asking us to find the value of the discriminant of each quadratic equation. Okay, so the discriminant again is this piece right here, b squared minus 4 times a times c. That's the only thing we're filling in. Okay, so let's look at number 7, because we are going to need a b, an a, and a c. So we need to identify what my a, my b's, and my c's are. Okay, so let's label it. I have A, B, and C. Okay, so now that I know my A's, my B's, and my C's, let's go ahead and rewrite our discriminant piece, but leave the spaces. Okay, so our discriminant piece is B squared minus 4 times A times C. Okay, so let's fill it in. What is my B for B squared? That is a positive 9. Okay, minus 4 times a. My a goes here. A is also 9. Times c, right? And my c is negative 9. Okay, so this is where we are actually going to solve it. So I'm going to zoom out so you guys can see what I'm doing on my calculator. Okay, so the first piece I want to solve is this 9 squared. So I'm going to turn on my calculator, and I'm going to do 9 squared. 9 times 9 is 9 squared. Okay, so I know that is going to give me 81. So just this piece right here gives me an 81. Okay, and we are subtracting something, so I'm just going to bring down that subtraction sign right there. We're subtracting whatever this piece is. Okay, so now I can clear out my calculator. Okay, what is 4 times 9 times negative 9? So I'm going to do 4 times 9 times negative 9. That's going to give me a negative 324. Okay. So let's zoom back in. What happens when I have a double negative here? 81 minus a negative. It turns into a positive. Okay, now easy peasy. What is 81 plus 324? It's going to give me 405. And we know that our answer is 405. Okay, so we solved for the discriminant. So let's do it again for number 8. So the first thing I want us to do is identify our A's, our B's, and our C's. Okay, so my A comes first, then my B, then my C. Okay, so once I know my A's, my B's, and my C's, then I can fill in my discriminant, which is B squared minus 4 times A times C. Okay, so my first space is my B squared. What is my B? It's going to be 4 minus 4 times A. Okay, what is my A? 2. And what is my C? 8. Okay, so now we can use our calculator right here. So the first piece I'm going to solve for is this 4 squared. So I'm just going to put 4 squared in my calculator. That's going to give me 16. Okay, so we know we're going to subtract the next piece. So now in my calculator I can put, 4 times 2 times 8. And that's going to give me 64. Okay, now easy peasy, what is 16 minus 64? And I get negative 48. And there is my answer, my discriminant. Okay, so it's just that little piece of the quadratic formula. Okay, so let's do it again for number 9. Okay, so let's identify our A's, our B's, and our C's. A, B, C. Okay, once we've identified them, we can go ahead and fill in our formula. So I have B squared minus 4 times A times C. Now we can fill it in. So my first space is my B squared. What is my B? 4. Minus 4 times A, so what's my A? 5. Times C, what is my C? 7. Okay, beautiful. We've filled in our discriminant piece, so we can go ahead and use our calculator to solve for it. Okay, so the first piece I want to solve for, put in my calculator, is 4 squared. So I'm going to clear it out and do 4 squared. It's going to give me 16. Okay, we know we're going to subtract the next piece. Okay, and my next piece is 4 times 5 times 7. So I can go ahead and in my calculator punch 4 times 5 times 7, and I get 140. Okay, and now easy peasy in my calculator, I can do 16 minus 140, and what do I get? Negative 124. Okay, so my discriminant piece was negative 124. So we just solved for the discriminant. Okay, one more. One more just for solving the discriminant. So let's look at 10. Let's identify our A, our B, and our C. A, B, and C. Okay, let's plug it into our discriminant piece. B squared minus 4 times A times C. Okay, let's go ahead and fill in our empty spaces. So our first one is B squared. So what's my B? I have an 8 minus 4 times A. What is my A? Negative 5. And what is my C? Positive 3. Okay, we have filled it in, so we can go ahead and put it in our calculator. Okay, so the first piece I want to punch into my calculator is this 8 squared. Okay, so I'm going to put 8 squared in my calculator. It's going to give me 64. Okay, now I'm going to subtract the next piece, so I'm going to bring that down. My next piece is 4 times negative 5 times positive 3. So I'm going to punch that in my calculator. 4 times negative 5 times 3. That's going to give me a negative 60. Okay, well, what happens when we have this double negative? It becomes a positive or a plus sign. Okay, so now what is 64 plus 60? Okay, so in my calculator I can do 64 plus 60, and that will give me 124. And there we go. Okay, so we didn't solve for the entire quadratic formula today. We just solved for the discriminant. Well, where is it? Right here. Okay, for that B squared minus 4 times A times C. Okay, we just practiced solving that one piece.